So recently I made a video talking about how Lethal Company is a perfect game for those trying to learn a new language. In that video I mentioned how it is not going to be for everyone, but I also talked about how I would be making a video on how to learn a language if you only have one person you're talking to and yet you still want to learn by playing a game. Of course there are other ways to learn, but I just really like using games to learn, so that's what these two videos have been on. Now, in my opinion, this has to be one of the best games that exists if you're trying to learn a language by playing games. Now, the game is called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. It's a weird name for a game, but it is about how you and one other person have to team up to disarm a bomb. So one person is in charge of playing the game and has to explain what they're seeing, and then the other person is in charge of the bomb defusing manual. They are seeing with all of the solutions to any situation you could find yourself in. Now, unless the two of you communicate and actually tell each other what you're seeing, then you won't be able to defuse the bombs. So if you've already played this game a bit more than the person you're playing with, then you're likely to have to explain how to do each of the puzzles. So despite the description in the manual, there are still some pieces that you kind of have to figure out along the way, especially if the person you're playing with isn't that used to playing a lot of games. That's going to be a situation you're likely to find yourself in. Like, for instance, in the clips you're seeing, she's not too used to playing these types of games, so I end up having to do a bit of explaining on the side as well.
Mas você... Ai, você tem que me explicar onde tá o triângulo.
Eu fiz.
Não. Não, porque não tem aqui, você entendeu? Porque não tem o triângulo aí.
Tem que estar me ouvindo. This is a game that puts a pretty severe time limit on you while you're playing. This leads to stress, and if you're not a fan of stressful games, then I would probably not suggest this game to you. However, the stress is mostly due to the fact that you have limited time, and most of the time that very stress, it helps make you forget about the fact that you don't really know the language you're using. For a lot of people, this is something that they struggle with, and thus it might actually be helpful. Like, most people aren't that comfortable using the language that they're learning when they start learning a new language. So if that's something that you realize that is a problem for you as well, then I would suggest giving this game a try and see if it helps alleviate that stress that you feel due to your uncertainties. Just like how I explained with the last video on Lethal Company, this is a game that you can lose and that you're very likely to lose quite a few times. Now, in a lot of cases this happens in hilarious ways, or it could also happen in stressful ways.
4?
Eu não sei.
Acho que... Ai, perdemos. Por pouco. Ok, de novo. Número 4. Rápido, amor.
Esta é o 3, então pressiona o número...
Perdeu. Já foi.
Por que você clicou? Não estávamos sem tempo, né?
Estamos sem tempo já. Sem tempo. So communication is super important, but if you make a mistake and you happen to die, the great thing here is just that you can go back and try again. However, just the fact that you're likely to die in ways that are either super funny or it's like the penalties aren't really that severe for dying. It means that you're likely to remember these mistakes instead of just continuing to repeat them. But even if you do, then yeah, you can just continue to repeat it until the lesson sticks. So we all know that we can learn from our mistakes, but here the main focus is always going to be on understanding the situation as described to you. And if you make a mistake, you have
both the opportunity to go back and have a look at it again to see where you went wrong, and you have the chance to try again right off the bat. Now, this is a very quick way to master a situation. It might actually be like, this is basically the way that most people suggest for you to learn a language, by continuously testing yourself. And in most cases that isn't actually something that's very fun, but in this case it is actually. And when you do something that doesn't work, then you try again in a slightly different way. So this also makes sense if we look at some of the models that attempt to explain language learning, or just learning in general. Specifically, Piaget had this way of understanding learning as filling out our understanding of a concept, which is all well and fine. But what he argued was that the most efficient way to learn was when something didn't match our current understanding, and we therefore had to reorganize our knowledge in order to make sense of something that we experienced. So there is this thing called symbols. It's one of the modules, things that you saw, that where you frequently have to describe these symbols in order to solve the module. It is the perfect example of the thing that will benefit you the most when you're starting to talk about something new in a language you're learning.
Ok, os símbolos, eu tenho o A junto com E.
Símbolos, tá? A junto com E. Então, A.
Tem o H com traço.
You see, you're frequently going to be encountering situations where you need words that you don't know, and one of the best signs, like, this is probably the thing that should be giving you the most motivation if you manage to notice that you're reaching this point, is that you're able to use the language well enough to be able to describe things that you don't know the actual name for, using the vocabulary that you already know. And you're doing this in a way where native speakers will then still be able to understand you. So if that made no sense, then allow me to give you an example. So let's say that I don't know the name of some sort of sport. I will try to explain what the people are actually doing while playing the sport. That's a useful strategy, right? And most of the time that will be sufficient in order to make the person understand you. Especially if they are native speakers, you're most likely to learn the actual word as well. This is a great way to also see if you're making progress in your target language, because you're managing to sort of circumvent a problem that you have using the skills that you already have in your target language. Now, I mentioned in my video about Lethal Company that there is a problem that you're likely to have. That same problem is present in this game as well. However, it is slightly easier to solve. Now, this is an old game. Like, there is a video of Markiplier playing this like 8 years ago, I think. But this means that you're not likely to see any updates coming to it at this point. Since there are no ways to use the game itself to look for partners, you're stuck trying to find ways to do this outside of the game. In the clips that you've been seeing, I'm lucky enough to have my incredible girlfriend available, and that happens to be an excellent way for me to keep practicing my Portuguese. But I would struggle a lot more trying to find someone to practice my French with, since I don't know anyone who speak French on a regular basis. But I still only have to find one person. And this is why I would still say that it's slightly easier to use this game for language learning than it is to use Lethal Company. While it is possible to play Lethal Company with just one other person, I would still suggest playing it with 4 people, or like, be in a group of 4 people to have the best experience, since that is what the game was made for. You also technically only need one person to have the game in order for you to be able to play the game. Like, to play Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. But you would then be stuck with only that player being able to disarm the bomb, unless you're in the same room, which we were in the clips. But if you're not in that situation, then the other person then has to explain what to do. So thus I would still suggest having 2 versions of the game, but in my situation we didn't need more than 1 version. Yeah, I was just quite lucky in that way. So for those of you who have gotten to know someone through apps like Tandem, and they then speak your target language, this could be a great opportunity to use the language if one or a few or both are able to get the game. Just make sure that you get the correct manual that corresponds with your target language or languages. Otherwise, you're likely to get the solutions wrong, or you just mix things up. So they have separate manuals for more or less every language that I've at least considered learning. It just means that you have to get the correct manual, but you just look it up on Google and you'll find a manual without any difficulties. So I mentioned in the last video about how I would use Leave for Company to learn a new language, that there is a video coming out on the game that I would choose if I didn't want to interact with anyone while learning a new language. Now, that will be coming out soon-ish. These videos are still coming out way too infrequently for my taste, but hey, I guess that's what happens when you work out in the gym for 12 hours of the day, every day. Now, if you haven't watched the video on Leave for Company, then I would highly suggest going back and watching that one. And yeah, if the other video sounds interesting about how to learn a language on your own using games, then stick around for that. And yeah, that's it for me. So, neck out.